This is a very interesting lesson for a lot of students. And the reason for that is because not a lot of teaching material out there covers how the AAMC builds MCAT CARS passages. So we'll go over a couple key highlights so students have a better understanding of what their CARS passages are made up of. Because once you understand how the passages are built, it really improves your ability to learn how to read them. So the first things first, in terms of word limits, AAMC is capped at a 600 word limit per passage. And the passages all come from external sources. So that could be a little bit weird because many students are probably thinking, well, if all of the passages are coming from an external source, how can AAMC make them standardized for an exam? Just talking from the physical component of the passages themselves, although AAMC uses external material, they can actually play with that material in a wide variety of ways. So this includes omitting sections entirely, reformatting paragraphs, and altering punctuation. While all of these might seem like fairly minor things in the long run, remember AAMC is pretty crafty. If they start moving around the sections, sentences, and paragraphs, they can create confusion in a passage where confusion might not have existed before. And of course, we have to assume that they don't necessarily have our best interests at heart. So while they might be doing it to help make the passage more clear, more often than not, their tricks are usually to confuse us. So another common concern that students have is basically, well, if AAMC is using externally based passages, how can they even build questions or find passages that fit with the general theme of the MCAT? Because remember, they can't just throw random passages on the MCAT. That would destroy the curve and would be very useless as a standardized test. So what do? Basically, AAMC has a group of elements that they like to have in their passages. We at MCAT Savior call these elements testable concepts. And basically, this is a group of elements that AAMC likes to have in their CARS passages to make them more and more standardized. So you can think about it this way. They have a certain standardized group of elements, and they look for those elements in the external passages that they try to get and manufacture for the exam. This is actually really important because if we learn these testable concepts really well, we can identify them as they come up repeatedly in multiple different CARS passages. This is one of the key fundamental skills that's a big part of the MCAT Savior CARS course, and it's a big part of any student's CARS skill to begin with, because once you start unlocking the fundamentals of how a passage is built and what to look for, your reading process becomes a lot easier. It's kind of the same thing like in Chem Phys, Bio, or Psych Soc. Your content knowledge is your testable concept. You know that if you read a passage about a certain type of physics formula, that physics formula is probably going to be tested in the questions, more likely than not. It's the same way with CARS passages. Testable concepts that show up in the passage have a higher likelihood of being a part of a question or an answer set when you get to the answers and questions in CARS. So let's take a quick look at what we think are the most prominent testable concepts. This slide is ripped straight from our lesson on testable concepts, and this lesson is actually available for free as part of the Module 0 strategy set, so feel free to check that out if you like. But one note here is that the amount of testable concepts that AAMC can use on an exam is technically infinite, because anything that's in a passage, they can turn into a testable concept. But we do believe that there is a strict set of repeating elements or testable concepts that AAMC likes to go to time and time again for their questions, answers, and passage elements. So in order from easy, medium to hard, these are those elements. And if you have any experience with CARS, you might already be thinking, wow, I've experienced some of these in my previous passages dealing with questions. And it's true, they do tend to repeat themselves quite frequently. This is just an abbreviation for what we refer to as a manufactured figure of speech. Basically, a figure of speech that the AAMC creates, puts a meaning to, and then asks about later in the section. Unfortunately, these can get pretty challenging. Anything in this row often typically shows up in the hardest of hard questions and can pose quite a challenge. You see tons of these sprinkled across the medium questions, and of course, the easy stuff is fairly easy to find. So while this is by no means an exhaustive list and the amount of depth in each of these testable concepts is very huge, we hope this actually gave you a good overview of what you want to look for when you're analyzing a passage. In our module 1, we go through each of these testable concepts in detail to explain how they relate to AAMC's passages, how you can identify them, how you can use them in a question-based setting, and so forth. The main takeaway that we want students to get from this lesson right here is that you don't have to be afraid of cars being non-standard. While every cars passage that you see on test day is going to be relatively different from every passage you've seen before, remember, AAMC is a standardized test-basing company, so they have to make things relatively standardized. And that means that when you learn the fundamentals of how they select and build passages for the exam, you'll have an easier time reading those passages and an easier time improving your scores when it comes time to doing the questions. So we hope this helped. Alright, that was a complicated lesson. If you still need help, check out our full-length blog post that we linked in the video description, explore more of our YouTube channel, or just head on over to mcatsavior.com where you can get all of our strategy courses for free.